Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Reading into Culture podcast. My name's Zara.
Hey, I'm Chris.
We're the editors of Reading into Culture, and we are here today with Nihira.
Anywho,
Hello. So nice that you're here. Before we get into your poem called "Poems Hold No Life," would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Hello. I'm Nihira. I'm from India. I'm from Bombay, in Western India, but I've sort of grown up all over. I did high school in Canada, then I went to the US for college, and now I'm back working in India. Um, I never know what to say in an introduction, but yeah, I'm really happy to be speaking with you. And the I've been following the website for a while, so it was really nice to see something accepted for an issue. Um, and yeah, should I say something like about my writing journey? I
Yeah,
don't
that
know.
would
yeah,
be
I
that would
love
be.
to.
I was about to ask that next. Like, tell us about your kind of story with writing.
Um, Growing up, I think I was like a school librarian's favorite child because I was just always in the library reading and just wanted to read as much as I could. And then sort of started writing in like a very young person, internet culture kind of fan fiction way. That was really my first like sustained experience with writing original work, derivative, but like my own words. Um, and then I left India to do my high school in Canada because my parents very rightly felt that creative writing is not, at that time at least, something that was encouraged in schools here. So they
Hmm.
thought that I would be better suited to like an education somewhere else. And my mother had like a PhD offer there, and they were willing to sponsor me in the public schooling system there. So I could do it for free, which was exciting.
Mm.
Um, and so there I like, sort of had creative writing teachers who were so kind and generous and really sort of um, wanted you to imagine as much as you could, which was nice. So that's really where I started to take it seriously. Um, did a lot of writing in college, but then I don't know, when you start like working, it just life gets in the way. And I feel like for the past half decade, I've sort of shut that part of my life out. And then yeah, there's some things in my life that happened that sort of told me I need to stop doing the 9 to 5 grind, making money, and I just need to come back to my roots. So I've quit my job full time. Like, I don't work. I'm doing very small side hustly stuff, and then trying to focus as much as I can on writing, which has been exciting. And so the poem actually I shared was after maybe 5 years of not writing any poems, like working on this, which was very exciting. Yeah.
Oh,
Amazing.
amazing.
That's so exciting.
So did you
Yeah.
write this poem before this kind of 5 year hiatus or after? And you just kind of
Yeah, a little bit of it was from this experimental poetry course I took in college,
Mhm.
with this really amazing professor, Jennifer Firestone, and she sort of introduced us to feminist avant-garde poetry.
Mhm.
And so that's the roots of this poem lie in that, but I really got a chance to work on it after my writing hiatus.
Mhm. Nice.
Amazing.
Well, we're glad that you're back.
Yeah, it's,
um,
it's good stuff.
very good to hear that, people move away from the 9 to 5 grind to writing. That's very, very enriching, I think, for the world. So that's really great. So then, would you like to read out your poem for us?
Poems hold no life. A runnel swims hushed, growing poems and vines hiss beneath the cement, since they have little to provide to civilized order, tilting farther and farther away from sanity, for they know not the laws of aesthetic facades. Wound tightly, they frame distance against there where wound arrived from only to learn of dispersed debris. My marooned gut overflows all around the hollow words, weeping I have wrangled them. Watered frames learnt that gaps in my spine formed a net from mucus and bile. The reddened net caught pain and cleaved skin from my shoulders so that I could remain afloat. My tongue knew not of laws it could be butchered by. Does an entrail not outline a rotten scream? The road expands, the photograph drowns unseen.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think maybe a good place to start with this poem is with the paratext, just kind of a way in. So this poem is in response to another poem called "Don't Look for My Life in These Poems" by Eunice D'Souza, and
Mhm.
I have that poem here. I don't know if we want to read it aloud or we just want to kind of have it be. I don't know how important it is to the poem in your mind and how central it should be to our discussion.
Yeah, the prompt for when I was in
Hmm.
my experimental poetry class was to respond, to be in conversation with the poem. And so it was very, yeah, if you okay with reading it, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read it out then. It's a short poem. Don't look for my life in these poems. Eunice D'Souza. Poems have order, sanity, aesthetic distance from debris. All I've learned from pain, I always knew, but could not do.
It's amazing. She's an amazing poet.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful. I wasn't familiar with this poet or this poem before researching for this episode, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful poem.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You kind of take the nouns
Yeah.
from it. And I just noticed as well that I was wondering because the word poems and the word all is are capitalized in your poem, and I wanted to ask about that actually, but I just now noticed that those are the kind of the start of the lines or the start of the sentences in "Don't Look for My Life" in these poems. So that's a really nice hint
Yeah.
at this poem. Can you
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that, about this choice of kind of taking the exact words of this poem and putting them in your poem?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so it the the prompt, I mean, originally was to be in dialogue with another poem, and there's a sort of line of agreement and disagreement in my poem with her sense, the sense at least that she's trying to arrive at with the poem. Um, but the anchors of it, which is one is the poem itself, like almost like a meta sort of narrative about poetry, um, and then the other anchor, which is all, I thought, because I mean, all encompasses life itself. So she doesn't bring life back into the actual material of the substance of a poem. It's in the title, but it's not there in the substance. But I think the word all is doing that work of like that what she's learned from pain is life itself. um, so I sort of wanted to retain those two words and build around it. And so actually those two sort of the lines that are around those two words right now in my poem were the beginning, and then way later, like while editing and going over it, I've sort of filled the space between them, and the all in life has been pushed down to like the middle of the poem. But yeah, I thought, at least I remember thinking like back when I was first doing this exercise, was that this is sort of anchoring her poem in a way that I wanted to also do in my poem.
I think that's really lovely. Did you
No,
want to say?
I think there's a very interesting like dialogue between these two poems, as you say, like because the D'Souza poem is very short and very direct, almost kind of deceptively complex, but has a certain simplicity. Or a poem holds no life. Poems hold no life is a much more is grounded much more in kind of metaphor and imagery and kind of flowery language. And it's quite a striking difference when you have the poems side by side. They really are quite. Your poem is kind of on one extreme of the spectrum, so to speak, and D'Souza's poem is perhaps on the other side of the spectrum. And I think that maybe is that a was that something you were thinking about in writing, or was that just a kind of difference in your voices and styles? I want to see, and I guess kind of at what point was this expansion and into a more kind of verbose language? To what extent was this a kind of conscious process for you?
Um, I feel like I've never been able to be brief. Like I feel like I really overdo it, and it's a lot of editing for me is like cutting down stuff and being mean to myself in a way, because I'm so bad. Like I'm too precious with the words, and I like try to hold on to them, but sometimes it is better to sort of let the few words speak for themselves. But I've never been able to get to what she does, which is like spin something so beautifully in so few words. um, but I think there was, because I started with the image of water, I
Mhm.
think I was trying to also have kind of like a waterfall in the poem.
Okay.
um, like sort of you're going from one rock to the other, but as smooth as possibly you can, like as water would. um, so I think I was trying to, so that's each verse has a sound that's sort of centering it. And I was hoping that that helps the reader sort of just go from one line to the other and just keeps like a melody almost
Mm.
there. um, but so I wanted that experience of moving through water, I think, in the poem, because it begins and ends with sort of images of like either water or a body of water. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. There's like, it's not like one line is one kind of sentence or one kind of unit of thought, as they say. It's like it just
Mhm.
runs on, and even across the stanzas and into the next stanza. So I think that that's actually
Mhm.
really nice. And it's actually interesting that the first kind of sentence, if you will, until the first full stop, uh, is like more than a stanza, and then towards the end it becomes kind of more quick. Um, and I don't have a particular question about that, but what is that kind of trying to do?
Yeah, I think just keeping with the waterfall, it's like a drop, like a
Mm.
long drop, and then you hit the pool that's formed at the end of a waterfall. And then you're sort of floating and swimming and sort of going back and forth there. I
Mm.
think maybe that's what I was thinking of when I did that, because yeah, now that you're pointing it out, I can see that the first sentence is quite long. So it's like that notion of falling, and then you've sort of finished falling.
Mm.
Just finding your
Interesting.
place there. Yeah.
I would like to ask as well. You said that you have both agreement and disagreement
Mm.
with the original poem. Don't look for my life in these poems. Can you expand on that?
Mhm. Um, so I poetry is not my primary sort of um, like outlet for writing. I'm a fiction writer primarily, so poetry is a bit, even for me, it's a bit like complicated to get into.
Mhm.
um, and it takes a lot more effort for me to sort of really get through a poem, in terms of understanding it, or I mean how much ever you can understand it. But I don't know, she says don't look for my life in these poems, and she's a very, I mean, in India she's a very illustrious writer. She has a lot of poetry out there. And she was like a really big sort of figure in the early 2000s in the poetry circles here. And so it's almost cheeky to say that, because every time
Mhm.
someone does read you, they are thinking a piece of your life is there in especially I think people do it a lot more with poetry, because poetry is assumed to be non-fiction primarily, like you
Mhm.
are saying something about your life more so than I think fiction writers deal with. So I feel like it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek title that she has. But then when you actually read the poem, it's much sadder than you would expect from that title. Um, and so she's almost saying that she finds a way to be like clear cut and straightforward in poetry rather than in her own life. Um, and I think, like, for me, it's complete. Like, I feel like I go to poetry to be haywire. Like, I have no idea
Mhm.
what a poem will do, what I'll write, what will end up being understood from that. Like, it's so much more chaotic.
Mm.
That I don't think she's being honest in that. I
Hmm.
don't think, like, or maybe it's again it's a tongue in cheek that I'm not understanding, but I don't think that she's like, I think her poems are not always full of sanity. And I think that's
Mm.
sometimes the beauty of it, when you're just going there to be purposefully um, confusing or confounding to the reader or something. Um, so I think that's what I disagreed with, but also that I think people place a lot more sort of weight on a poem than they do on their own life sometimes. Like, I feel like I struggle to understand myself more than I would a poem. So I agreed with that part of it. Like, it is confusing to live, but yeah, it was complicated. Yeah, primarily grown up in really really big cities,
Hmm.
so I've never been exposed to, and this is gonna sound weird, but nature. Like,
Mm.
I have never seen a runnel swimming. Like, I don't know. I've seen like garbage water swimming. Like, I have not actually experienced. I've never grown up in a countryside setting. It's been like New York City, where the air smells like, piss, and then Bombay, where it's like very dense and very full of busy, busy life, but no such thing like a runnel swimming. So I've started this with a conceit. I don't know what that would look like in reality. Um, so I feel like I was agreeing with her that it is very like, I don't know, there are conceits that you place for yourself in your own life. You're trying to expect too much and then you get too little, and then it's
Hmm.
just like going up and up against something. And then the pain part of what she was saying, I think that I wanted to explore more, like not just mental pain, like but physical pain.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's, I think, a lot of what I was responding was directly to all the things she was trying to say, and then said in such great few words. Yeah.
Mm.
That's very interesting. I think it's very interesting that you mentioned this kind of urban rural divide and this kind of rural landscape and urban landscape, because
Hmm.
I think that that's very much there in the poem. This kind of tension between something kind of wild and natural and something kind of ordered and
Yeah.
structured, which in the D'Souza is poems are ordered and structured and life is wild and natural. And in
Mm.
your poem, there's a certain added element that cities, concrete, is
Mhm.
structured, whereas runnels and these things and vines are wild. But I think there's a kind of interesting synthesis. You say that there's not runnels in cities, but I imagine this: a runnel swims harsh growing poems and vines hiss beneath the cement. A runnel beneath
Mhm.
cement makes me think of a sewer, perhaps. It
Yeah.
just strikes me as a deeply urban, a kind of urban recontextualization of a rural image, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it doesn't read to me like you're describing like a stream in a beautiful
Mm.
mountainous area, but like a deeply urban stream, so to speak. And I think that's my question is how does this kind of sorry urban rural divide map onto this distinguish this I can't talk into this distinguishment between life and poetry, perhaps. Is that something there, or
Yeah.
is that am I
Yeah.
just seeing
No,
things?
that's very interesting. Yeah. Um, I think historically with me, it's been a grass is greener on the other
Hmm.
side, quite literally, because I've hated cities, but I only managed to live in
Hmm.
them. And I think I would be confused if I didn't live in them. Um, but there is, but while living in a city, there's like a staleness that occurs that I always in my head imagine wouldn't exist if I was living in like a beautiful little house by the pond, and there's a stream nearby and there's birds chirping and that sort of environment. But I think that the pain that she associates with
Hmm.
life is something that I think the poem associates with city life.
Hmm.
Mm.
um, there's like an exhaustion, like just a daily pain that emerges from having to live in a, I mean, hyper polluted, usually, um, very, very sort of segregated, very, very isolating experience of living in a city. For me, especially because for much of my life, I was a migrant. So I was like a young migrant in Canada in
Hmm.
school there. That's an additional isolating experience of how you interact with a city, because it can be very brutal if you don't know people, if you don't have the kind of social sort of circle that would keep you safe and sort of happy. Um, and so I think there's like, maybe that is the parallel that you're seeing with
Hmm.
the life part, because I think in the poem I've definitely associated like a good healthy life not with a
Hmm.
city. um, so I think that's what's jumping out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the poem kind of connects the destruction of nature by a civilization and the cement and everything
Hmm.
with the kind of violent destruction of the body. Um, and
Yeah.
the body parts are also personified in this poem. And I wondered maybe you could talk a little bit about this kind of like the destruction of the body and this violence that is in this poem.
Hmm. Um, yeah, this is one of those like personal notions that maybe is why people always think poetry is non-fiction.
Mhm.
Um, but I have a chronic pain condition. It's called
Mm.
fibromyalgia. So it's like an early type of arthritis. So
Mhm.
it's a nerve and muscle and bone sort of degenerative condition. But so I've thought a lot about how the body is like a constant source of pain because of that reason. Um, and sort of where it's the most is what's tracked in the poem. So the spine is like a major sort of concentration of pain. The shoulders are like very, yeah, burdened maybe by the pain. Um, and so the poem was almost kind of a way for me to release my understanding of my bodily pain and just track it, as a way of identifying for myself, like the very simple question of where all does it hurt, like where all can it hurt.
Mm.
And I when I was writing it, I didn't realize that's where it was headed, and then it very quickly went into the body. And I think that's because I mean, I don't, for me, I don't know what the other side of the story is, but when you're living in a city, I think you have to be very aware of your own body. Like there's so many things that are working against you. I mean, in India, whether it's like the breathing, the air is like extremely polluted. The water can be extremely, not clean and not healthy to drink. You have to like boil it so much, to get it to a clean stage. And there's food and where you should buy from, and there's just so many ways that your body um, could slide very easily into a painful place, that I and with very little institutional care set up to then respond to it, that I didn't realize that that's where it was headed, but it made sense at the end that that's where it was headed. Because I think like bodies are very magnified in the city space, even though everyone sort of always says you can become invisible in a big city. But actually your body is like under a magnifying glass the whole time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So, would you kind of this civilized order that you kind of talk about in this poem? Would you say that's a purely negative thing in within the poem, or like what is the because the poems have order, sanity, aesthetic distance from debris. It's kind of like a um, kind of an idealized state almost, but also a little
Mhm.
bit, maybe a little bit lifeless or maybe a little bit dull. You know,
Yeah.
and in your poem, it seems like much more. I don't know. Civilization is much more destructive, and order is kind of. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I think when I first started this poem, it was like 7 years back or so. That's when I took that
Mhm.
class. So I was in a much more angsty phase of like hate New York City. It was
Mhm.
just such a horrible. But then I had nights where I was like, I love this city. Actually, there's so much to
Mm.
do, and it just constantly expands in front of you. The same place can look totally different, from one day to the next. There's a train coming. um, no, what I was saying was that I think, um, New York City, when I was there, I could be in a place and it felt completely different from the next day that I was there. And so I think you have this very rapid shifts in moods that I think the city facilitates, because it's so constantly evolving and just churning day in and day out, that it facilitates this almost like chaotic internal self. Um, and so I think that's what I was hinting at, about like there's nothing to ground yourself for consistency from day after day. like
Mm-hmm.
in a long term consistency, like how someone would imagine like 1950s America white picket fence sort of fascination that doesn't exist in the city for good or for bad. That could be really liberating for a lot of people. I mean, if you don't want to live your life according to a certain set of rules, that's a very liberating place to be, but it can also be extremely overwhelming. um, but I was also thinking about how city making and how city building is a very tilted process. It's usually an imposition. There's usually sort of bureaucracy in private sector and public sector all working against sort of maybe what local communities actually may need. um, and the process of building out a city, which I mean in India it happens a lot because a lot of big cities don't really have borders.
Mm.
They're just sort of constantly expanding into the rural and semi-urban and semi-rural areas around them because they need more and more in order to supply to the people who are in the main city. And so this like constant expansion comes at a price because communities that have nothing to do with the city and may not want to have anything to do with the city are not given a choice. Really, there's no sort of democratic making form of making a city. And so that's what I was thinking of about um, the actual process of step by step building a city. I mean, New York City was the same way. It's New York City was built on sort of, I mean, indigenous land and also a lot of displacement of communities that have lived there for decades and decades. So you have, I mean, gentrification was a process, but like that's a newer process, I think. Even older, sort of 40s and 50s, you had the interstate highways and the federal highways that America built over the homes of a lot of black and brown communities in New York City. And so that displacement is what technically built New York City. And I was thinking of that also. Is how a lot of people have to be lost in order for this city to have been found. Um, yeah, yeah. And so that I think that pain is sort of maybe is what the body is a metaphor for almost, that it takes a lot of pain to squeeze out a city almost.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's true. Did you want to?
I guess is a city to you, is a city anti-life? Is I guess my question, because in a way that a poem's anti-life, and like is a city something that's alive here, or is it the thing that restricts life, or is it both? I don't know. That's kind of my question. How
Yeah,
does it relate to life?
I have always thought I shouldn't be polemical about this because I feel like
No,
it's
please be polemical.
crazy for someone who only lives in cities and who never lived outside of a city. Um, but I do feel like that people try very hard to live in a city and they try and make life every day, and I think a city makes it much harder. Like
Mm.
I feel like, I mean, I have no knowledge of sort of the rural counterpart to this, so I don't know what, like I'm sure village life is just as constricting to a lot of people. A lot of people aspire to leave it for what they see is a more superfluous city life. Um, but I think cities get romanticized too much and not demonized enough. Because it's extremely painful to live in a city. I mean, if even if you're an older person and by a margin, like you're 60, it's extremely hard to live and move around in a city. It's not a hospitable place for you at all. Um, if you're a young person, it's like so much paranoia around young people just being free and out and open in the city. So I feel like I have always felt a city is more restricting and more hostile than it is accommodating, I think.
Mm.
Um, and then doubly what I was thinking of was because Eunice says, "Don't look for my life in these poems," which means that there is some life in her poetry. But I think that's another thing that gets romanticized maybe a bit too much, is that sort of poetry is this very flowery part of our lives, and and they are sort of, the creativity of them imbues in them a certain life. And I was maybe also trying to say that like poems can be just as empty as a city almost. It's possible that happens.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a very I did actually want to ask about the title as well, because it's such a it's a sentence that at once kind of feels so obviously true and also so obviously wrong. Like it feels so like and it's such a strong statement, and such a, yeah, like a no nonsense kind of statement. So and it's obviously responding to someone saying, "Don't look for my life in these poems." Uh, so it's not a direct kind of denial of the other person. Like it's not saying if the original poem title was this look for my life in these poems or anything, then it would kind of be a direct disagreement. But this is just kind of like a slight reframing of the question.
Yeah.
It's like you can't even look for anyone's life in this poem in
Yeah.
these poems. And I don't know if you've already touched on that, but I wanted to kind of zoom into the title even kind of more concretely.
Yeah, it's more assertive and definitely from a more pessimistic phase of my life where I really didn't. I mean, it's funny because now I try to hold on to writing a lot and I try to like give very dedicated, devoted time to it every day. But when I was in a setting, which is a college setting where everyone is, buzzing with write, like everyone's writing every day, they're creative, they're giving out poems, like there's open mics in the college every day. After a while, I was like, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like none of this like the world is still dying, like we're not doing anything. Like it just felt a much more pessimistic relationship to writing when everyone's constantly writing. And now that I have to fight for time to write, I think I see a lot more value in it. um, but yeah, it's definitely an assertive way of sort of trying to stop assumptions about poetry, maybe some poetry at least. I don't know if it still is because I'm very far removed from sort of American poetry scene now compared to when I was there. But there was a sort of a very hard sustained auto fiction and auto writing sort of trend in creative writing that I just always, maybe because I can't as easily do that, but I always found it a bit grating, I think. So I think the poem was also very directly referring to that, like this obsession with the self in a way that isn't, I thought for a lot of it was not insightful. Um, a very superficial obsession with the self, I think. Like an obsession that's sort of trying to approach intellectuality about the self in some way. But it was a lot, and it was a very overwhelming way of receiving people's. Because also, then how do you respond to a creative work that's so intensely personal? I would not want to sort of overstep bounds into critique, because how do you critique something that's coming from such a personal place? And so I felt like I was writing this as like, just I don't do that with this poem. But then it's ridiculous because I do exactly that. I'm talking about my chronic pain in the poem. So um, it's a complicated thing for sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the same. I do think I have thought often as well that people, like, just because you had this insight doesn't mean that it's interesting for other people to kind of read, and you do have to add the kind of
Mhm.
artifice to a poem. You do have to actually do some work to make it
Yeah.
interesting. So I do definitely get that, and I do think there is a tendency in poetry these days, and especially kind of probably
Mhm.
college kind of level,
Yeah.
um, to be kind of revealing, and then that's the whole thing about it. But I think if everybody kind of does it, then it kind of loses
Yeah.
its edge, and maybe I don't know. Um, but I don't think that you particularly do that. I think every poem comes from the self, because you
Yeah.
write it. It comes from your head. You write it
Yeah.
down, so it has to come from the self. And using your experiences is not necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. But I do get exactly what you mean with the, it's not particularly insightful sometimes and these sort of things.
Yeah, no, I think you're preaching to the choir slightly on the order of the kind of resistance to overly the kind of over oversupply of overly personal of very personal writing is kind of we're at a point now where it's now almost the dominant mode, at least among a certain kind of writing, is to be highly personal. And I think you lose something there, and you lose quite a lot there, in fact, especially in poetry. But you do get stuff too. But I don't think this poem does that. Just kind of it being about the body is not the same as it being autobiographical.
I wanted to ask about a particular line, which is "My tongue knew not of laws it could be butchered by," because this kind of brings in a new theme in the poem, which is kind of speaking or speaking up or these sort of things. And also, actually, the photograph drowns on scene brings in the kind of the visual and seeing or not seeing, and the tongue is kind of speaking or not speaking. And that's kind of a theme that's not really present in the rest of the poem. Um, and I wanted to ask that because I think it's those are both very interesting lines, and there's like a hesitancy to perception and then also to speaking. And yeah, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think the last verse in my head functioned as a very harsh pull back to reality, because I think the first major part of the poem is very a lot more abstract than it is.
Mm,
Like it's a lot more of a atmospheric sort of way of pulling someone in, and then the last verse sort of shows the maybe the real place of everything that a city is made up of, which is technology. It's the criminal law. That's what I was thinking of. Um, Technology and just all these, and then infrastructure in the road, and so all these real elements that quite physically form a city, and sort of dropping someone back there. Um, yeah, I think the my tongue knew not of laws it could be butchered by that line. It was a relic from seeing how my own college, but also New York City in general, the government back then and the police department then responded to protests that were happening in sort of from 2015, I think, onwards to 2019, 2020. So protests against police violence, protests against sort of a whole bunch of things coming together in New York City, and just how easy it could be for your voice to be your prison almost. I mean, for other people, I was still a little bit removed because I was on a visa, so I tried to sort of find my place in different ways. It was a little scary to be at the forefront, but I know for a lot of people who were at the forefront of protests that the speaking up became a way for the city to sort of cage you essentially.
mm,
And so that's what I kind of meant by the hostility of a city, is that as long as you know your place, a city can be inviting, but when you try to sort of fight in certain ways against what the city is imposing on you, it very quickly becomes not a warm welcoming place, and the facade sort of drops. um, so that's sort of what I was trying to explore with that line. And then the photograph, I think it's I mean, there's a long running theme and history of cities rising and falling,
mm,
and sort of what we're left of them is this visual archive, this visual record of whether it's paintings or artwork or artifacts that archaeologists may dig up. Now it most likely will be a selfie of someone in a city, like in Times Square, that once Times Square is no longer there, is the last record we have of it. So that's sort of what I wanted to point at, is that how flimsy actually these infrastructural giants are. Like when I was in the Big Apple, it looked crazy to me, despite
mm,
being from Bombay. Like Bombay is still an incredibly overpowering city. But New York City, the skyscrapers in that thing looked like they should not exist. It looked horrifying. It was like you look up, you can't see the sky, you don't see the sunlight. It definitely was very different kind of city. But I think what that makes you feel like is a permanence that's actually false. I don't think that permanence is a real thing. It feels very permanent because of how overpowering it is. But it can be all washed away in like 50 years, 100 years. It could all be gone. And I think that flimsy nature of it is what I wanted to bring at the end, because the photograph is the reason we have photographs is to look at them. We may not see a photograph of New York City 200 years from now. So yeah, that impermanence is what I wanted to place in the last film.
Yeah, that's interesting because it does kind of tie back to the poems as well, because like even Shakespeare was writing kind of I write a poem about you to so that you live forever, and it's also kind of a false permanence. And I also think like even both the poem and the poet, to kind of think of it as eternalizing, or what's the word, like a
Yeah, I know what you mean.
that's kind of false. It's okay. We might not have forgotten Shakespeare 20 years after his death, but we will forget him 2,000 years after his death. It's still
I mean,
impermanent.
the permanence comes from us, which is just like the life. Like we are the ones bringing to it. But the city as an object in itself doesn't have any of that to offer.
Yeah,
It doesn't have life to offer. It doesn't have a sense of permanence. That's all coming from us. It's sort of sapping it from us.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that strikes
Yeah,
me
that's
like because you kind of the kind of direct way to read this poem "Whole No Life" is the poems don't contain a kind of autobiographical nature. That's kind of the obvious first way to read that. And then you can think poems are kind of constructed and not organic. That's kind of the second maybe layer. And maybe there's a way to think about it like a poem on some level, or at least within some kind of traditions and some theories, serves to preserve something, to take something that is or will die, and to keep it living somehow. Like what you said with Shakespeare, to kind of immortalize a moment
that's the
or a
word.
life. And maybe this is so that's another way you could understand poems on life. As poems hold no life as a kind of projection of this supposed capacity for poems to immortalize something or to make something living that was previously dead.
yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
And that can outlive you, hopefully.
Mm,
Because I think a lot of us strive towards that. I mean,
yeah.
in the sense of outliving yourself in some way, because we're societies that are built around avoiding the idea of death and sort of trying to run as far away from it as we can. But maybe the creative work sort of lends a way for us to feel like we're outliving ourselves.
Yes, I understand. But they don't. Do you think?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's again the pessimistic half of my brain coming back in, because I don't think. I mean, there could be like an archaeologist who 500 years from now like digs up something like a book, and it's like, wow, this thing written by the ancients. But I
Yes.
mean, what meaning of the original is really left in that then at that point?
And then this archaeologist will die, and his
Yeah,
society
yeah.
will die, and so yeah, it's just endless.
So for me, this idea of a photograph drowning strikes me very specifically as an idea of developing film in a dark room.
Yeah.
And it just occurred to me as you were discussing the poem that it's an image of water too. That the poem starts out with water. I didn't notice that because I was thinking of a dark room, and that kind of chemical solution in which one would drown a photograph to develop it. But then, so that would be the creation of a photograph. But then here, if it's then a body of water which the photograph is drowning, and that would be the destruction of a photograph. So I kind of wonder this kind of, I don't know. I just I find that very interesting. I don't know if that's a deliberate image of film development or if I'm just hallucinating again. But there's a kind of two ways of reading the poem, of reading the ending of the poem that say really contrasting things. And I don't know. Wonder if you could respond to that.
Yeah, that makes me so happy. That's exactly the image I first had in mind,
Mm-hmm.
is because I've always been fascinated about how a photograph gets developed in
Mm-hmm.
this like little black room, and they're almost like they're washing a piece of cloth or something. They're like putting it in a tub and then hanging it out with
Mm-hmm.
clips. And that process seems very rural to me. Like it feels like such an arcane
Mm-hmm.
ritual. But it's happening with this technological object that's almost changed how we live and how we perceive each other. And so that has always fascinated me. So that is what I was hinting at. But then I think what I was trying to do is to make it drown in the runnel that you see in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of
Yes.
um, that it's sort of not, yeah, it's not leading to somewhere, but it's going somewhere. So it's not going to develop into a photograph, but it's actually being sort of decomposed in the runnel. Yeah.
Mm.
Amazing. That's such a great ending. I hadn't even read that, and I think that's
Yeah.
I haven't read that into it. I mean, I think this when you said the destruction and the creation at the same time, or rather, destruction kind of replacing creation, um, is seems to be like kind of the main theme of this poem. So it's, I think, a really great way to end it.
Yeah, I think so
Mhm.
too. If you read the ending as then the photograph being like, drowned in the river, there's a kind of
Mhm.
there's almost Christianity to it, almost a kind of baptism that I as of
Yeah.
kind of the River Jordan.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something that
Yeah.
too. A river is such a strong image of, and in of the Greeks it's death, and this a river has so many meanings and so many situations of so many a life giving thing, a death giving thing, a boundary, and a photograph drowning in that is
Yeah.
there's so much of that really rich, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I went to a Catholic school when I was in
Mm-hmm.
India. When I was so up until the age of 15, I was in a Catholic school. So it was a lot of nativity
Mm-hmm.
readings, a lot of this stuff. So even I think in the middle in the first verse there is, for they know not what, like there's a reference to that kind of speaking and that kind
Yeah.
of language, because I don't know. I know in the American context it's a very different sort of significance of this kind of language. But in India, the understanding of Christianity is very different. It's a very complex, a lot of sort of perception of it being a
Mm-hmm.
colonial force. But there's also a lot of ways of having indigenized Christianity that are very specific to
Mm-hmm.
Indian communities, to South Asian communities, and how they've practiced and built out. I mean, Eunice D'Souza herself, she's a Christian. A lot of her poetry sort of wrestles with this, and I found that sort of space very interesting, because also the language is very interesting. Um, but yeah, there's a longer version of this poem that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
share, but that has the
Ah,
baptism, very like
okay.
a verse of it is dedicated to the
Yeah.
baptism. Because I've just found that very interesting, like visual process. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I
It's
think that's very
fascinating.
interesting. And then maybe as a response to this, you mentioned earlier that poems always kind of come from the self, and I do think that's true. But some people don't. Some people think that there's maybe a kind of divine, spiritual
Mhm.
force involved in the creation of poetry.
Yeah.
Um, and this poem, what you say, I know, and they know not the laws of aesthetic, is a kind of there's a certain channeling of maybe a prophetic something
Yeah.
spiritual is being channeled here, something prophetic. I don't know.
Hmm.
There's a relationship there as well. Um,
Yeah.
a kind of foretelling of some kind of doom, which like what you say with the
Yeah.
collapse of the city. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. And even the weeping, the butchering, like I
Mm,
tried to do it in a biblical
yeah.
fashion. I don't think I succeeded too much, but I have lesser understanding of the Bible. But this sort of catastrophizing experience
Mm,
in sort of, at least the oral stories that I've heard of, from the Bible. That's sort of what I was trying to approach, because there's a very interesting duality in it, because it's supposed to be the apocalypse, but it's supposed to be a cleansing
mm,
experience. Like, it'll be where sort of there's a return to better times
yes.
from there. Um, and so it's almost like the relationship with wildfires and indigenous communities in like Western America, for example, because wildfires are very catastrophic right now, but there is evidence of sort of indigenous communities having used controlled fire to cleanse certain portions of the forest to keep sort of balance and harmony in sort of the relationship of their environment at least. And so I've always found those two things, like the destruction creation that you were talking about, like the fact that one thing could be both, is a very interesting experience.
Yes, absolutely.
That's so fascinating.
That is a central kind of Christian idea that the death is life, and with Jesus obviously, and then with the end, the rapture, the revelation, the end times is a kind of horrible destruction of
Yeah.
of this plane of existence that leads to the creation of a much more wonderful plane. Is kind of
Yeah.
deeply so. Yeah,
And I'm not sure how it is in Europe, but in America, it was almost a very casual way of speaking about this, like very casual pastor way of talking about like really horrible things that may happen, at least according to their beliefs. So I just found that very fascinating, like in the Midwest, America, like how casual these really apocalyptic events can feel, because the hope is tied to it's going to be better after, like this is what's needed for it to be better after.
Well, then I would say we should ask our final question, which is basically why write at all? Why do you think people should write?
um hmm. Well, actually, when you first asked that, I mean, when you first set out that we will ask this, to everyone for this issue, I actually thought more of storytelling rather than writing, because I think a lot of, I mean, South Asia, a lot of oral traditions of storytelling have a lot more influence than I
Yes.
think, at least on me, because
Hmm.
just the way I grew up, sort of, and that notion of storytelling is so um, collective. Like it's very like it'll be your aunt telling you a mythical story, or it'll be someone else on the road sort of talking about their life in way more dramatic terms than what has actually happened. And so there's this, like, the theater of storytelling is so present all around that I wouldn't know what else to do almost. I mean, because for me, the way to find my permanence, I guess, is to write it down. Um, but the essence of it, which is telling stories, is so central to life, like not as a separate skill that you pick up, or like a separate hobby or a separate profession or a separate craft. It's actually like inbuilt in how you speak and relate to one another, like this art of telling stories. And I was actually I was listening to some, like, a podcast about an archaeologist talking about um, cave based research, which I've been very interested in for some reason. And she was talking about how a lot of cave art was sort of understood through the lens of adulthood. And then one day, some archaeologists like crouched down and they saw, like, at the foot of the cave a whole bunch of small messy drawings, and they were like, oh, this is children drawing here. And it's almost interesting because the adult drawings, you can kind of sort of do a functional analysis of, oh, they need to communicate there's a mammoth outside, so that's why they're drawing a mammoth. But with children, why would they? I mean, they're drawing just because they want to draw. They just want to be like scribbly, messy kids, and then just explore and get little paint on their hand or chalk on their hand and rub it on the wall. And it's for the sheer fun of it and the adventure of it that they're engaging in this activity that they're seeing their parents and adults do. And that just really struck me, as I think we are the children in this. Like, we have no idea why we're doing this, but it's just something we keep doing again and again and again. Is that we keep writing, we keep trying to figure out the way to tell a story that maybe no one needs to hear. I don't think it's like critical that my poem got out there in the world, but I still keep like doing it because that's what's I don't know, that's what's fun in a way. That's what's getting some energy and building some energy in me, maybe. Um, so that's actually what I thought of. I didn't think of writing per se, because I think that's a whole separate
Yeah.
question, is that why do we feel the need to put pen on paper or type keys into a keyboard? Like I have no idea. That's like way more daunting than just like listening and telling a story out loud. But yeah,
No,
that's
that's
kind of where my mind went.
Mhm.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I guess that's a good way to, why write? I don't know. Maybe you could just kind of oral tradition is very interesting. A very interesting response, I think. Um,
Mhm.
especially when we're doing like a podcast. We're not writing. This is not like we could do a written interview and we don't, and that says something, doesn't it?
But yeah, I
Yeah.
do also think like
Mm,
the kind of, if you put the word literature on it, it makes it so serious, and you need to
mm,
justify it somehow, and it's important,
Yeah.
and I think the play in it, the kind of the,
Mhm.
just like a child would do, is I think
Yeah.
a good kind of thing to channel, um, even when you're writing literature,
mm.
because it's just supposed to be fun and creative, and these sort of things. So I think that's a really nice image, the cave painting by the
Yeah,
children.
it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think there's a sense of formalism that I think technical writing sort of, at least like perception of it, can have. And
Mhm.
I think the informality is maybe where more sort of stories are living, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's very interesting. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
that's lovely.
Okay, well then I think I should probably bring this slowly to its conclusion. If you think there's nothing glaring that we've missed out.
Um, I actually just wanted to know why you started reading into culture, but I don't know if you want to answer that or no. But I just always love when people start their own thing.
Yeah.
I
um,
don't know that.
that's a good question. I kind of started. I had the idea when I was on a bus to work, when I was working at a bookshop, and I was just thinking, because we both write, but I'm also very interested in publishing and the publishing industry and these sort of things, and I feel like you don't. We both kind of we studied English literature together, and I don't know, maybe we feel like um, our taste maybe isn't the dominant taste, and
Mm,
Mm.
just to kind of foster the kind of literature. That's how I think
mhm,
about it. I think about it as kind of fostering the kind of literature that I want to see more of in the world, and
Yeah.
it's um, it's just such a joy to.
mm.
It's incredible that people send their pieces to us,
Yeah, it is.
and that we get to read them, and that we get to pick them, and now talk to you and the other writers, and it's but that's, I guess, more why we stuck with it, because it's a lot of fun. But I don't know,
Yeah.
that's personally my reason, just because kind of this poetry, like, yeah, like your poetry, like is the kind of poetry that I want to see and that I want to read, and that is maybe not, you know it's not the first person kind of therapeutic kind of poetry that is mostly out there. um I don't know, what's your reason?
Yeah, why did I start it? It's a good question. It's a good question. Suppose yeah, for me similar reasons, but also just kind of a desire to kind of feel part of a where we live is not so easy to kind of not so much of a community for literature. There's not open mics every night, this kind of thing. So a desire to kind of know other writers, talk to other writers, create a space, like Zara said, create a space where literature is important and discussions of literature, because we publish essays too, and kind of space where I don't know, where it's where you can kind of be in communion with other people somehow. It's important to me.
Mm. That makes sense.
That's very sweet that you
Yeah,
asked us a question.
very nice.
Okay, well
Nothing
then.
else from me.
Okay, so
Perfect. Would you like to read your poem out again, so we can kind of look at it with fresh eyes?
Poems hold no life. A runnel swims hushed, growing poems and vines hiss beneath the cement, since they have little to provide to civilized order, tilting farther and farther away from sanity, for they know not the laws of aesthetic facades. Wound tightly, they frame distance. Against there, where wound arrived from only to learn of dispersed debris. My maroon gut overflows all around the hollow words, weeping I have wrangled them. Watered frames learnt that gaps in my spine formed a net from mucus and bile. The reddened net caught pain and cleaved skin from my shoulders so that I could remain afloat. My tongue knew not of laws it could be butchered by. Does an entrail not outline a rotten scream? The road expands, the photograph drowns unseen.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so
I
much.
actually just got onto the serpent thing, like the hissing thing, and I was like, oh, Bible. That's maybe my Catholic schooling is really seeped in there.
Yeah, well, that's
It's
true.
true, yeah.
Something about winding as well. Maybe quite skilled and
Yeah,
inclined.
yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, well then, I guess there I will have
Thank
to
you so
say.
much for such a good conversation and such lovely questions.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh,
I think so
thanks.
too. Yeah, it's been a really wonderful chat. I think. So thanks for writing such a wonderful poem and spending your time to talk about it with us. I think. Yeah, it's been. I've had so much fun with this chat.
Thank you.
I hope you, dear listener / viewer, have also had a great time. So yeah, I guess that's all the time we have. And thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next week, unless this is the last one we upload, then I won't. And yeah, you can go to readingintoculture.com/summer-2026 to read this magazine. And yeah, there'll probably be an episode next Sunday. So bye. Thank you so much, Nihira, and bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.